fear is reborn.
Now, crossovers have always been an excellent way to boost sales, especially when dealing with established characters that are going through somewhat of a slump. And nowhere is this trend more prevalent than in the horror genre. After all, two terrifying beings are always better than one. Well, in this marvelous video, we are going to have a look at something similar that takes the trope a step further by introducing three of the most horrifying characters in the same comic book. Well, if you haven't guessed by now, this time we are breaking down Dynamite Entertainment's limited comic series, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. But before we dive into the terrifying detail, please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button. This might be just a small click for you, but to us, it means an awful lot. With that out of the way, I guess it's time to get spooky.
Because they have returned.
The scariest trio in town. Crossover concept. Fans of horror flicks will undoubtedly recognize the three titular characters. I mean, it hardly gets more iconic than this ragtag crew of beloved horror stars. And even if you aren't intimately familiar with all of their lore, we can still bet that you have seen them somewhere or the other. Just take our first monster, the man who will kill you in your dream, Freddy Krueger. Created by one of the godfathers of pulpy horror cinema in Hollywood, Wes Craven. Freddy is the malevolent spirit of the child killer. On top of that, poor Freddy was also burnt to death by the parents of his victim. This leaves him horribly scarred, with skin almost peeling off of his face. Over the years, Freddy has become one of the most recognizable faces in horror cinema, with his red and green sweater, brown fedora hat, and leather glove with menacing metal claws. Since his debut in 1984, there's hardly been another character that has caused such mass panic among the populace. At one point, American Film Institute declared him to be one of the greatest villains to be ever put on screen. Due to the astounding success of Nightmare on Elm Street, it was only a matter of time before Hollywood weaved an entire franchise around Freddy. In the subsequent film, we were introduced to Freddy's origin story, a tale so horrendous that it could scare even the toughest of men. Freddy's mother, a young nun named Amanda Krueger, once served as a nurse in an insane asylum filled with some of the most disgusting maniacs ever to roam the earth. One day, Amanda was unfortunately locked in the room with the insane criminal, who managed to keep her hidden from the authorities for days. One can only imagine the horrors that she underwent during this period. But when Amanda finally recovered, she was barely alive and pregnant. It is evident that she had been assaulted brutally, and this resulted in the birth of Freddy. Our beloved child killer is often known as the bastard son of 100 maniacs, and I guess that the overly complicated moniker finally makes sense after this story. Over the years, Freddy has appeared in numerous sequels and spin-offs, many of which weren't nearly as good as the original. Thus, in 2003, Freddy was put into a crossover film with another horror icon. Our second character for today's video, Jason Voorhees. Well, as things go, Jason isn't all that different from Freddy. Maybe that's why this terrifying duo gets along so well. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and go back to the beginning. Jason was first introduced in the 1980 film, Friday the 13th, where he was just the son of the camp's cook-turned-killer, Mrs. Voorhees. The films build up Jason as something of a myth, a legend, a killer who has a manifestation of the curse plaguing Crystal Lake. This unstoppable madman had been haunting the lake for close to 50 years now, and has hatched about 200 to pieces, thanks to his trusty machete. Jason was born with hydrocephalus, a medical condition that left him with an abnormally large head and a slew of mental abnormality. Of course, these reasons were enough for Jason to get severely bullied, and during one such incident, he was pushed into the lake where he presumably died. Mad with grief, Jason's mother, Pamela, murdered both the counselors who were supposed to be on the lookout the day Jason drowned. Homicides are never good for business, and the camp was soon shut down, with the locals spinning rumors regarding how the area was cursed. Some years later, Stephen Christie, who inherited the camp, tried to get it up and running once more. This angered Pamela, and she soon embarked on yet another killing spree. However, this time, things did not go so well for her, as she was killed by an employee named Alice Hardy. Needless to say, Jason didn't take kindly to his mother's decapitation, and soon, he went out and stuck an ice pick in Alice's head. This kicked off a prolific killing spree spanning numerous sequels, spin-offs, and reboots. Just another star psychopath, I guess. But there is yet another piece to the puzzle, and that is Ash William. Ash William is an anomaly in this group. After all, his backstory is pretty normal. He was just a supermarket clerk on a relaxing weekend trip with his friends, when an encounter with body-possessing demons just screwed all his plans. The incident took place in October of 1982 in a secluded cabin in the woods of Michigan that belonged to Professor Raymond Noby. Unbeknownst to anyone in the party, the quaint, scenic cottage had been the site chosen by Nobi for unleashing the malevolent Kandarian demon throughout their vacation. The group would end up getting possessed by the Deadites. This led Williams to commit unthinkable acts against his loved ones in the name of self-preservation, and eventually made it out of the cottage. But things would only get worse for our hero, as he would end up getting absorbed by an otherworldly rift by the end of the first Evil Dead film. For Evil Dead 2, Ash finds himself stranded in England during the Middle Ages. It is in this film that we first learn that Ash is actually the Promised One, a prophesied hero, destined to defeat the Deadites. With a fate like that, it was certain that Ash would spend a major part of his life taking down demons, and that's exactly what happened. Ash's time-traveling misadventures spawned a whole franchise that spawns across sequel, TV show, and, well, comic book. With that, let's dive into the facts of how the landmark crossover between these three came to be. Project development. The popularity of Freddy and Jason meant that it was only a matter of time before Hollywood saw the crossover potential in these franchises. This studio interest culminated in the form of the 2003 film, Freddy vs. Jason, a supernatural slasher. Sees the two monsters pitted against each other. The film was a pretty standard slasher with some gory sequences littered throughout, and managed to earn almost 3 times its budget at the box office. This definitely turned some heads among the executives at New Line Cinema, as it became evident that these two pop culture giants could still garner a profit. Freddy vs. Jason also ended on a pretty ambiguous note, which meant that both these monsters could make it back to the silver screen for the sequel. The studio also decided to throw Ash from the Evil Dead into the mix, and for a long time, a sequel starring Freddy, Jason, and Ash seemed pretty likely. However, things hardly ever go as planned in the movie business, and creative differences erupted between the team and Bruce Campbell, who had portrayed Ash since his very first appearance. Now, recasting a character as iconic Ash was always going to be problematic, which basically left the film adaptation in production hell. Fortunately, someone came up with the idea of using a script to create a comic book. This resulted in the 6-issue miniseries written by James Kohoric and Jeff Katz. The bloody art on the pages of these comics was created by Jason Craig, J. Scott Campbell, and Eric Powell. Thus began the bloody and brutal saga of Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. The story unfolds. The film begins some 5 years later after the brutal beatdown between Freddy and Jason at Camp Crystal Lake. The comic makes it clear from the very first page that this story exists in the same universe as Freddy and Jason. An anonymous narrator tells the tale of Crystal Lake, now known as Forest Green. This unassuming little tourist spot is one of the darkest places you could ever hope to visit, but we see ample attempts to hide its bloody history. The place has undergone a major change in the last few years and is now strewn with condo, lakeside apartments, and even an S-Mart. We get a pretty brutal page depicting the horrors of Freddy and Jason, the only 2 survivors of the massacre. Lori and Will are making their way back to the lake in order to check out a very ominous hunch that both the monsters are still alive. The narrator openly mocks this stupid decision. We really can't help but agree. As you'd probably expect by now, this doesn't really go well for the 2 of them, as Will just ends up getting disemboweled, while Lori finds herself being chased by Jason and his giant machete. The young woman tries to defend herself, thanks to a handy chainsaw, but the narrator laments the fact that she is unfortunately not the chosen one. Soon, Jason lodges his machete in the middle of Lori's skull, and that's that. As Jason towers over the woman's corpse, a signboard stuck to a wall morphs into a very familiar face. Freddy Krueger sticks out his horribly scarred nose and laughs out maniacally. Eventually, we learn that after the fight 5 years ago, Freddy had all but perished, but despite everything, he wasn't dead. The malevolent spirit had managed to linger behind in Jason's psyche, haunting him with hallucinations that take him back to his darkest moment. Freddy makes Jason go through the bullying, and even transports him to a reality where Jason's mom and Freddy have gotten together. Freddy beckons Jason to go to the old Voorhees home to procure the cursed tome, Necronomicon. It is believed that this book, written with blood on pages of flesh, is the answer to getting Freddy out of Jason's head. It is here that the narrator finally makes his entry into the story. He is but a mere housewares domestic engineer at the S-Mart, but he is much more than meets the eye, as Ash Williams is not just a mere S-Mart employee, but also the true chosen one. The next issue is just as bloody as the first one. Jason makes his way to the S-Mart, making his first public appearance in many, many years. Meanwhile, Ash is just getting settled into his new job at the S-Mart, where most of the crew is comprised of rookies who can barely get the thing up and running. We learn that Ash is here for his other calling, the one that prompts him to take down Deadites, but for the moment, his biggest concern is dealing with the store manager. While Ash makes new friends, Jason is lurking in the woods just outside the store, biding his time by slaughtering a bunch of pretentious young women. One of them manages to escape and makes it to Ash, who realizes that this is no normal crime. The police arrive on the scene, but are clueless as usual. Ash tries to convince his new colleagues regarding the existence of demons and Deadeye, but the youngsters don't really take the old hero seriously. On the other hand, Jason is getting more and more dangerous under Freddy's grip, and the dream manipulator has almost convinced the psychopath that he is his true father. Jason roams through the forest, hunting down everything that crosses his path, and certainly, things will only get worse from here on. Back at the superstore, Ash concludes that the cursed Necronomicon could be the only reason behind the existence of an undead entity like Jason. This points him in the direction of the Voorhees mansion. He decides to check the spot out, but soon realizes that it's kind of a local makeout spot for teenagers, including some employees from the S-Mart. As we all know by now, if there's one thing that Jason really hates, it is promiscuity. Thus, he begins taking them all out one by one until only a girl named Bree is left. Fortunately, Ash makes it to the place just in time and manages to help her escape. And yeah, he has the Necronomicon with him, so I guess there's still some hope. The duo scrambles into the car, but there's something about automobiles in horror story. I mean, 9 times out of 10, the damn things just won't start. So as expected, Ash and Caroline find themselves stuck when a machete comes crashing through the windshield. It feels like the end of the road, but an SUV suddenly crashes into Jason, and Ash turns to find a familiar face. It's his colleague, a woman named Caroline, one of the only people who had believed Ash's tales of demons. Jason's failure is a huge setback for Freddy, who screams at the weeping Jason within a hallucination. Somehow, Freddy manages to recover information regarding the man who thwarted his attempt at procuring the cursed book, which leads him directly to the S-Mart. Back at the shopping complex, Ash, Carrie, and Bree are having a hard time convincing the others when suddenly Jason himself walks in through the door. As you can probably guess, a bloodbath ensues, and we get a pretty satisfying scene in which the store manager finally shuts up. Yeah, murder is not exactly legal, but for this one really annoying character, maybe we can let it pass. As Jason is tearing through hordes of shoppers, Ash gets his hands on a chainsaw, and the two fight it out. Despite a valiant effort, Ash gets beaten up pretty badly and is unable to stop Jason from getting his hands on the book. The other workers in the store are able to rescue Ash from a painful death, but poor Bree isn't that lucky. As Jason recedes to his cabin, Ash and the others regroup. Our heroes have a restful moment, but little do they know that Freddy has finally found a way back to the world of the living using the cursed book's secret knowledge. As the others hide in their small suburban house, Ash drifts off to sleep. And as we all know, that's kind of the worst thing you can do when Freddy Krueger is around. Ash wakes up in a dream to find that something is clearly off. His prosthetic hand has turned into a real one, and as he ponders this change, metal claws rip out of his finger. That's when we know Freddy's found them. The next issue of the series is mostly devoted to the nightmarish adventures Freddy takes our heroes on. Ash recalls how he got his wrist cut off by the deities. He tries to snap out of the dream by cutting his own claw-like hand off, but that doesn't work at all. Instead, Freddy appears from the dripping blood. Ash tries to fight back, but within the dreamscape, Freddy is a literal king, and it's all futile. Somehow, Ash manages to snap out of the dream by burning his hand with the barrel of the shotgun. His other comrades aren't that lucky. One in particular, a guy named Davey, dies in the nightmare as the others watch him being ripped apart in real life. Somehow, Ash and the remaining crew members manage to get to the S-Mart, where they stock up on supplies before heading back to the Voorhees cabin for a final showdown with the demon. Ash actually gets a chainsaw attachment for his missing hand, which definitely has to be one of the most badass things we have seen in a while. But the crew remains unaware of the fact that Freddy, too, is getting a major upgrade through the Necronomicon, which ends up enhancing his dream manipulation power. Anyway, the crew comes up with a plan, which involves Ash heading into the mansion alone to retrieve the book, while the others lay a trap for Jason. But come on, when have horror monsters ever fallen for bait? While Jason nears the crew member, Ash also finds himself on the receiving end of Freddy's attacks. Krueger reveals that thanks to the book's secrets, he can now appear in both the real world and the dreamscape. Not only this, he can also create illusions in the real world that are even more dangerous than his nightmare. But for some reason, Jason intrudes upon this battle and starts attacking Freddy. We later learn that this is due to Freddy going back on a promise he made to Jason. According to the promise, Freddy was supposed to fix Jason's disfigurement after getting his hands on the book. Now, trusting a dream-manipulating demon is pretty stupid, and I guess Jason realizes this too, when Freddy unleashes a horde of Jason's victims at the masked killer. Ash takes this moment to make his escape, but their troubles are far from over. While Jason fights his old victim, Ash runs through the dark woods surrounding the mansion. However, he is soon captured by deadite-possessed trees and crows. Still, never the one to give up, Ash bites the head off of one of the crows and reunites with Caroline, who is the only one of his crew still alive. They desperately hold on to the Necronomicon, but Freddy is hot on their tail. He creates a dream version of his beloved former home, 1428 Elm Street, complete with creepy little girls that Ash is forced to shoot through. However, this opening is enough for Freddy to get his hands on Caroline, but once again, Jason makes it there on time. The scene descends into absolute chaos as Ash, Freddy, and Jason begin trading blows. A blast from Ash's shotgun takes the mask off of Jason's face, revealing one of the ugliest sights we have seen in a while. Still, the battle is far from over. The battle rages on, and we see the true extent of Freddy's powers, which are quite beyond a normal human being's comprehension at this point. But still, the courageous Caroline manages to resist his nightmare and uses the Necronomicon to open a rift that sucks in Freddy to a dimension of the Deadite. Jason, on the other hand, is crushed by Ash's ultimate and sent to the murky depths of Crystal Lake, the only place he belonged. In the aftermath of the battle, we see Ash leaving town, but his head is still filled with thoughts of the greater evil that set him on this path. Still, it's the dawn of a new day. The world is safe, and our hero has Caroline by his side. I guess you could call that a happy ending. But yeah, in the last pages of this bloody comic, we see something at the bottom of the lake open its lifeless eye. Marvelous verdict. So yeah, that's the story of Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. It's not the most path-breaking tale of all time, I guess, but it does have its moment. Most importantly, it lets us take a look at some pretty cool interaction between three pop culture juggernauts, and we are all for it. If you're a fan of gore, blood, and horror, this is definitely a must-read for you. That's it for this marvelous video, but do let us know what other comic you'd like us to cover next. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay updated on all of our marvelous content. With that, I guess it's time for goodbye, but don't worry, because we will catch you at the next one.